Mesopotamia. The Rise of Civilization, Part 1. From villages to EMP, or long before the pyramids of Egypt, or the temples of Greece. Before Rome paved its empire in stone, a great experiment unfolded between two rivers. In the cradle between the Tigris and Euphrates, humanity's first real civilization emerged. This was Mesopotamia, a name given by the Greeks meaning between the rivers. But to the people who lived there, it was the center of the world. The story begins, not with cities, but with the end of an age. Around 10,000 BCE, as the last ice age loosened its grip, small bands of hunter-gatherers roamed the hills and valleys of the Fertile Crescent. These people moved with the seasons, chasing herds and gathering fruit. But then something changed. In the wild wheat and barley growing freely on the plains, they saw a different path, one not of movement, but of settlement. The agricultural revolution at places like Jericho and Catalyuk, humans began to stay. They built homes of mud and reeds, formed communities, and began the slow, miraculous process of domesticating nature. Wheat was no longer gathered, it was planted. Goats, sheep, pigs, and the mighty aurochs were tamed. This change didn't come overnight, but over centuries. Yet its impact was irreversible. Humanity had rooted itself to the earth. In this new world of food surpluses, specialization became possible. Not everyone needed to farm. Some could build, make pots, shape tools, or lead rituals. Others began to measure, to count, and eventually, to write. As the rivers flooded each year, they left behind rich black silt. The early people learned to channel that water into their fields, an innovation known as irrigation. But such systems required coordination, leadership, and planning. With the control of water came the rise of organization, of hierarchy, and of cities. The first cities by 5000 BCE. In the southern reaches of the Mesopotamian plain, farming villages coalesced into something new. Eridu and Uruk, among the earliest, began as clusters of homes but grew into bustling urban centers. At Uruk, great temples were built on raised platforms, shining white in the sun, early precursors to the ziggurats of later centuries. Inside these cities, temples weren't just places of worship. They were storehouses, schools, banks, and government offices. Priests, believed to commune with the gods, became the earliest rulers. Their temples became economic engines, redistributing grain, employing workers, and recording transactions. And with this complexity came the most enduring invention of Mesopotamia. Writing. First came tokens, small clay objects representing quantities of goods. Then marks on clay to represent the tokens. Eventually, around 3200 BCE, scribes began pressing wedge-shaped characters into soft clay tablets. Cuneiform was born, the world's first true writing system. With it, humans could now transmit not just goods, but ideas across time. Sumer, the birth of civilization, this fertile land came to be known as Sumer. Dozens of cities, your Uruk, Lagash, Umma, Kish, flourished independently. Each ruled by its own king, devoted to its own patron god or goddess. They were city-states, rivals, and sometimes allies. Bound by shared culture, but divided by power. In these cities, life was both vibrant and stratified. At the top were the kings and priests. Below them, scribes, artisans, merchants. Most people were farmers and laborers. At the bottom were slaves, though often not chattel, but debtors or prisoners of war. Women held surprising autonomy. They could own land, run businesses, serve as priestesses. Though political and religious power remained mostly male, Sumerian religion filled every aspect of life. The gods were powerful, emotional, and demanding. Each city's prosperity was tied to divine favor, so priests conducted elaborate rituals and offerings. Inanna, goddess of love and war, and Enlil, god of wind and storm, ruled the heavens. Their temples were homes, their priests, their servants. By 3000 BCE, writing had expanded beyond accounting. Epic poems, medical texts, hymns, prayers, laws, and letters filled thousands of clay tablets. The most famous of these would be shaped, centuries later, the Epic of Gilgamesh, chronicling the quests, sorrows, and eventual wisdom of a king of Uruk. Kings and wars with food, water, and wealth came conflict. Water rights, field boundaries, and trade routes fueled constant warfare between city-states. Temporary military leaders, originally appointed during crisis, evolved into permanent rulers. These lugars, big men, gradually replaced theocratic priests as the dominant political force. One such ruler was Lugal-Zagassi, king of Arma, who in the 24th century BCE briefly united Sumer under his control. But his triumph would not last. From the north, a man of bold vision and brutal ambition was rising, Sargon of Akkad, the First Empire. Akkad Sargon, whose name meant true king, was born of humble roots. Legend says, abandoned in a basket on a river, a myth later echoed. By Moses, rising from servant to king, he seized the city of Kish, and then turned south, conquering the Sumerian city-states one by one. Around 2334 BCE, he founded the Akkadian Empire, history's first true empire, uniting Sumer under a single, centralized rule. He replaced local kings with loyal governors, often family members. His armies reached the Mediterranean, the Zagros Mountains, and the Persian Gulf. This was unprecedented. Sargon's genius wasn't just military. He created a standing army, standardized weights and measures, and made the Akkadian language the imperial standard, yet with his centralization came rebellion. The cities of Sumer were not used to submission. His grandson, Naram-Sin, expanded the empire further and proclaimed himself a god, the first Mesopotamian ruler to do so. His victory stele shows him wearing the horned crown of divinity, trampling his enemies beneath divine light. But such ambition drew resentment. The Akkadian Empire, stretched thin and battered by rebellions, began to fracture. By 2154 BCE, it fell, toppled in part by mountain raiders known as the Gutians. The renaissance of Ur from the ruins of empire, Sumer experienced a revival. The city of Ur, under the leadership of Urnammu, rose to prominence. He founded the third dynasty of Ur around 2112 BCE, establishing what some call a Sumerian Renaissance. Urnammu's reign marked a high point in law and order. His law code, predating Hammurabi's by centuries, set fixed penalties and established justice through compensation rather than revenge. He also built the magnificent ziggurat of Ur, still visible today, rising tier by tier toward the heavens. His son Shulgi ruled for 48 years, expanding the bureaucracy, reforming taxation, and even claiming divinity. He standardized the calendar, organized state-run industries, and strengthened scribal schools. Under Ur III, Mesopotamia thrived. Trade flowed from the Indus Valley, Anatolia, and Elam. Women worked in massive textile workshops. The state managed agriculture, labor, and irrigation. Literature flourished. Hymns, poems, legal texts, and royal propaganda spread through the land. But the cracks returned. Climate change, salinization of fields, nomadic incursions, and over-centralization weakened Ur. Around 2004 BCE, the city was sacked by the Elamites, its ziggurat desecrated, and its king taken captive. A new world dawns as Ur fell. The age of powerful city-states waned. The great empires of the future, Babylon, Assyria, Persia, would inherit the legacy of Sumer and Akkad, but the flame had been lit. Writing, law, kingship, city life, astronomy, literature, all had been born in Mesopotamia. Though empires would rise and fall, the memory of Sumer endured, etched in clay, passed down through millennia, whispered by the rivers that first gave rise to civilization. Mesopotamia. The Rise of Civilization Part 2. Empires of Power and Memoir with the Fall of the Third Dynasty of Ur. Around 2004 BCE, the curtain fell on one of the last great native Sumerian powers. In its place arose a fractured landscape of independent city-states and migrating peoples. For nearly a century, Mesopotamia became a patchwork of rulers vying for power, until new forces redefined the ancient land between the rivers. The Amorites and the rise of Babylon. Among the shifting tribes of the West were the Amorites, peoples who spoke a Semitic language and gradually infiltrated Mesopotamia. They settled in cities, married into local elites, and eventually assumed kingship in multiple regions. One Amorite leader, Sumobum, took control of a small unremarkable city in central Mesopotamia around 1894 BCE. That city was Babylon. For over a century, Babylon remained a minor power. But everything changed with the rise of its sixth king, Hammurabi, who took the throne in 1792 BCE through a masterful combination of diplomacy, military strategy, and administrative reform. Hammurabi turned Babylon into the dominant force in the region. He conquered rivals like Larsa, Ishnana, and Mari, gradually uniting most of Mesopotamia under his banner. Yet Hammurabi's fame would be shaped not only by war, but by law. His celebrated Code of Laws, inscribed on a basalt stele, was one of the most comprehensive legal texts of the ancient world. Though not the first law code, it was the most detailed to date. With 282 articles covering everything from commerce to family life, theft to temple duties, it laid down harsh but predictable justice, offering protections for the weak, though always within the limits of social hierarchy. Hammurabi described himself not as a conqueror, but as a shepherd chosen by the gods to bring justice to the land. His rule fused central administration with religious authority. He restructured taxation, irrigation systems, and temple rituals, even dictating the scale of offerings. Babylon, once obscure, became the heart of a cultural and administrative order that would endure. But empires are often fragile without the founders who built them. Hammurabi's successors failed to maintain control. Rebellions spread, and a new dynasty, known as the Sealand dynasty, rose in the marshlands of the far south. Meanwhile, external threats emerged from the east and north. The Kassites and Babylon's long peace in 1595 BCE. A stunning development occurred. A powerful army from the distant Anatolian highlands, the Hittites, swept down and sacked Babylon. They seized the city and its treasures, including the famed law stele, but quickly withdrew. In the vacuum that followed, the Kassites, a people from the Zagros Mountains, seized control. Unlike past conquerors, the Kassites did not attempt to impose radical change. Instead, they adopted Babylonian culture, religion, and language. Ruling as its stewards, their dynasty would last nearly 400 years, the longest in Mesopotamian history. The Kassite period, though less militarily ambitious, was one of remarkable stability. It allowed for deep cultural development. Libraries expanded, scribal schools flourished, and the arts prospered. Babylonian astronomers began compiling records that would form the basis for future calendars. Physicians wrote diagnostic manuals that blended observation with spiritual understanding. Mesopotamian medicine and astronomy took on their classical form during these centuries. International diplomacy also flourished. Babylon became a recognized player in the club of great powers, alongside Egypt, the Hittites, the Mitanni, and later, Assyria. Kings referred to one another as brother. In letters written in Akkadian, the diplomatic language of the age, princesses were exchanged in marriages and gifts, sometimes gold. Sometimes lapis lazuli flowed across borders. Yet even this long peace could not last. Around 1155 BCE, the Elamites launched devastating raids from the east, capturing Babylon and ending Kassite rule. Artifacts like Hammurabi's Code and the victory stele of Naram-Sin were carried off to Elamite capitals. Prizes of conquest, the Assyrian, storm while Babylon faced instability. In the north, another power was stirring. The Assyrians, long a trading society centered around the city of Ashur, had begun to turn their attention from commerce to conquest. Around 1300 BCE, kings like Adaniru I and Shalmaneser I began expanding Assyrian territory. But it was in the 9th century BCE that Assyria became an empire. Under rulers like Ashurbanipal II, Tiglath-Pileser III, and Sargon II, the Assyrians created the most militarized state the world had yet seen. They deployed iron weapons, professional standing armies, siege engines, and cavalry, conquered peoples, were deported en masse, their homes razed and cities renamed. Terror was used as a weapon. The Assyrian message was clear: submit or suffer. Cities like Nimrod, Nineveh, and Dur-Sharrukin grew into monumental capitals filled with palaces, libraries, and temples. Inscriptions celebrated victories with gory detail. Enemies flayed alive, captives impaled, kings paraded in chains. Yet these same kings also patronized the arts and sciences. Libraries were filled with cuneiform tablets. Astronomy, medicine, and literature were copied and preserved. Ashurbanipal, the last great king, boasted of his literacy and amassed over 30,000 texts in Nineveh's library, an archive that would survive fire and time. But Assyria sowed the seeds of its own destruction. Its brutal policies created deep resentment. When internal conflicts weakened the state in the late 7th century BCE, old enemies pounced. The fall of Nineveh and Babylon's Renaissance Chaldean leader named Nabopolassar united the Babylonians and allied with the Medes from the Iranian plateau. Together, they attacked the Assyrian heartland. In 612 BCE, after a brutal siege, the great city of Nineveh fell. The Assyrian Empire collapsed. From the ashes, a new Neo-Babylonian empire rose. Nabopolassar's son, Nebuchadnezzar II, would reign from 605 to 562 BCE, and become one of the most famous kings in history. Nebuchadnezzar embarked on a massive building campaign, transforming Babylon into the marvel of the ancient world. He constructed gigantic walls, broad avenues, gleaming palaces, and monumental ziggurats. The towering Edamananke, perhaps the inspiration for the biblical Tower of Babel, rose over 90 meters high. The fabled Hanging Gardens, though still debated by historians, became legendary across generations. He also expanded Babylonian territory, defeating the Egyptians and capturing Jerusalem twice. The Second Conquest in 587 BCE destroyed the Temple of Solomon and initiated the Babylonian exile. A defining moment in Jewish history. Culturally, the Neo-Babylonian period revived ancient Sumerian and Akkadian traditions. Priests restored temple rituals. Scholars refined astronomical methods. The Enuma Elish, a creation epic, was recited during New Year festivals, connecting cosmic order with royal legitimacy. Babylon again became a center of religion, science, and commerce. But all was not stable. After Nebuchadnezzar's death, power struggles weakened the throne. The last king, Nabonidus, was a controversial figure. He neglected the chief god, Marduk, in favor of the moon god, Sin, and spent years away from the capital, in an Arabian oasis. Cyrus and the Persian conquest. As Babylon wavered, a new power rose to the east. The Persians, once vassals of the Medes, had united under a dynamic leader, Cyrus the Great. In 539 BCE, Cyrus marched west. The Babylonians, weary of internal strife and religious offense, offered little resistance. Babylon fell without battle. Cyrus entered the city respectfully. He restored temples, allowed exiled peoples like the Jews to return home, and proclaimed himself a restorer of order. The Cyrus Cylinder, inscribed with his policies, has been called the world's first human rights declaration. With this conquest, Mesopotamia became part of the vast Achaemenid Persian Empire, ruled from capitals like Susa and Persepolis. Though Babylon would remain a vital administrative center, its independence was over. Legacy of a civilization from scattered reed huts to world-spanning empires, Mesopotamia forged many of humanity's firsts. The first cities, writing, laws, empires, and scientific traditions. The marks impressed in wet clay by Sumerian scribes became the foundation for recorded history. Even after its political powers faded, Mesopotamia lived on. Its stories of Gilgamesh and Ishtar, of floods and towers echoed in the myths of the Hebrews, the Greeks, and beyond. Its kings and codes shaped governance for millennia. Its astronomical insights guided stars and seasons, and its very name, Babylon, would come to symbolize both the heights of civilization and the dangers of pride. The rivers still run through the land between them. But the voices of those who once built ziggurats and empires now speak through stone, clay, and memory. Their legacy is ours.